Hello and welcome back to Talking Europe. Wars are fought between armies and militant groups, but conflicts have their keyboard warriors too on the media and on social networks. We've seen this with Ukraine and Russia, Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Israel versus Hamas, to name just three recent examples. Social media use is growing. It's estimated that more than half of the world now uses it. And in parallel to that, unease has grown in the EU about the power of disinformation on social networks. The EU has tried to regulate with the Digital Services Act, but tensions remain high between the European institutions and Elon Musk, the owner of X, formerly known as Twitter. Well, I'm joined by Alexandra Gezer, a German Green MEP who sits on the Committee for the Internal Market and Consumer Protection. Welcome to you. And I'm also pleased to welcome Vladimir Bilčík, a Slovakian MEP from the European People's Party, who's a member of the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you very much. Good day.
I've seen that you're both quite active on X. I'm wondering, is there anything recently that you've seen that has particularly shocked you as being something that shouldn't be there or that violates the EU's norms in the light of this Digital Services Act, Alexandra?
Well, something that has shocked me was Elon Musk, with his personal account, recommending German voters to vote for an extremist far-right party that is under observation for being hostile to our constitution. I think that was quite a shocking piece of content, even if it wouldn't fall under the DSA. What is shocking on a more structural way, that I'm constantly being recommended accounts by X that very clearly spread disinformation, and I think that is a very, very worrying tendency.
And what about you? Anything you've seen?
I have not much to add. I think structurally what I find very worrying is that X seems to be doing a lot of steps, a lot of things just to avoid the implications of the Digital Services Act. And I think this is something where we have to be tough and clear that this is not the way to go.
So you sense that the social platforms are kind of a step ahead of EU regulation. They have ways
I wouldn't generalize the social platforms. I think we need to differentiate, and X is one of those which, has huge issues with the code of practice on the fight against disinformation. Others don't. So I think we have some rules in Europe. I'm proud that this House has been at the forefront of setting those rules up. Now they are legally binding, and the Digital Services Act is in place. And I think everybody should follow suit if they wish to operate in our single market, in our common European space, and that applies to X as well.
How do you think the DSA has been applied? Effectively or not so much?
Well, the Commission has been applying it for a few weeks, a few months, and I think for being in force for just a few months, they're doing some amazing work. They're really focusing on it. But I think we need to focus on the really systemic issues. It's not only about platforms removing illegal content. That is just the surface, and that we need to be clear that we want to protect freedom of expression. What we really, and what the Commission really now needs to tackle, are the systemic issues. For example, the algorithms that promote borderline content eliciting hate and fear, because that's what people engage with, and that's what brings profits to the platforms.
Advertisers are brought in by that. But who should change the algorithms? I mean, would that not be up to the platform itself to do that?
That would be up to the platform itself.
Okay.
The procedure, according to the DSA, is the platform does a risk assessment, but we do know that engagement-based ranking, so giving more visibility to the content that people engage with very strongly, is a problem. It is a risk for democracy because it promotes hate, it promotes disinformation, and it promotes far extremist parties and disinformation. And then the company should make a proposal on how to change the algorithms, and the Commission can actively recommend that.
Would you go that far, or is that too interventionist to change
I
the
think
internal algorithms?
One of the major consequences and systemic consequences of the DSA, Digital Services Act, is that the platforms must change, adjust their business models. I mean, this is the bottom line. This is where we have a huge agreement across this House, across the Democrats in this House, and it's time to apply that. And that also means that there is much greater transparency when it comes to the algorithms, just like the regulators in the banking sector can see the inside of the banks. Now the regulators, when it comes to the online platforms, should have access to what's happening in the kitchen of the algorithms. And of course, it is up to the platforms to adjust these. But one of the consequences of the DSA is that there is going to be much greater transparency in terms of how it happens, why it it happens and what are the consequences. And this is what we are in the business of doing at the moment. And I also agree when it comes to assessing the consequences of the DSA, we need quite a bit more time because it is just settling in, and I think we will see results already in coming months.
A quick point about spyware, because you've worked on this a lot, and obviously it is linked to the whole question of information, democracy, all those things. The persistent risk of spyware being used against, for example, high-level EU officials.
Look, spyware, again, has to do with a huge technological change. As you know, we see it in the online space. Spyware is something which is also here. I believe very strongly that spyware should be used when it comes to fighting serious crime, terrorists, and this should be done, however, with strong checks and balances. And I think this is where our institutions must catch up, and we cannot allow undue misuse of spyware. Spying against political opponents, journalists, judges, prosecutors, is absolutely out of line, is beyond the acceptable, should not be done, and this also applies to EU officials. I think this is where we have to take action, both at the level of the member states and the European Union, to make sure we have much better checks and balances before spyware is applied and used. And we must also make sure that it doesn't get in the hands of those who can misuse it.
Could this spyware be misused for example, the purposes of disinformation in election campaigns?
Oh, well, certainly. I mean, spying on journalists or spying on politicians, especially political opponents, might mean that you can get information and then circulate that information, definitely influencing public opinion and therefore the outcome of the elections. I think it's a very serious issue, what we have with spyware. I'm happy that the European Parliament adapted measures against that, and it needs to be very, very clear that it's a totally intolerable practice in a free democracy.
We're only a few months away from the European elections. What kind of disinformation are you both worried about most, and what tools does the EU have already? For example, the European Media Freedom Act, which is quite a recent innovation, and it's years of first.
Well, I think the main topics where we have to fear disinformation are migration, very emotional debates. It's definitely migration. It's definitely anti-feminism, attacks on trans people, on the LGBTIQ community, and it's climate. Interestingly enough, the far right has decided they want to go against the Green Deal and the climate measures, so this is where we're expecting it, but also about EU institutions. In terms of the European Media Act...
So can we come back to that, sorry, just to get your reaction, Vladimir Bilčík, because I think you might have some slightly different concerns about what kind of topics disinformation is going to come from in this election campaign.
Look, I think the disinformers will try to divide us, weaken us, attack our democratic institutions. I think we should be very much worried about disinformation about Europe, European Union, European politics. We should be very much worried about disinformation, glorifying Russia, Moscow and Putin on the one hand, and spreading lies about Ukraine. The realities are the other way around. So the ongoing brutal aggression by Russia against Ukraine is something which may have repercussions on some parts of the Union with the spread of disinformation. But really, as we saw it in the Brexit campaign, which was extremely unfortunate and full of hoaxes, there can be all sorts of lies directed at supporting those forces in these elections whose aim is ultimately to undermine Europe and European institutions, so the extremists.
And does sorry, you were getting to the European Media Freedom Act. Does it have teeth, this act?
Well, I'm not sure whether Orban is really going to change the way media is organized in this country just because of the European Media Freedom Act, even if I agree with the provisions that are contained to protect journalism and the journalistic system in the Media Freedom Act. I have one great concern about the Media Freedom Act, and that is the fact that platforms can't moderate content anymore for 24 hours. That goes under the etiquette of any kind of media, basically, and therefore media could very easily be used to spread disinformation online, and the platforms can have great limitations to intervene against that. So I see very positive aspects, but I have one very great concern that the European Media Freedom Act might contribute to the spread of disinformation.
This is one area I will disagree, because I think the 24-hour period is a fair one. Imagine if Elon Musk wants to take down the content by serious media which is critical of X. He cannot do it for 24 hours, and I think that is good news. The way the Media Freedom Act is drafted, I was the shadow rapporteur on this in the Libre Committee, is that we have some guarantees, good guarantees that it applies only to serious, independent and professional media. And this is why I think the 24-hour period in terms of the stay up of the media content online is a good way of approaching it.
What if a pro-Robert Fico media outlet says something that you think should be taken down? It won't be taken down for 24 hours.
I think this whole discussion about pro-government, pro-opposition media is a wrong way of approaching it. We either have good or bad media. And this is what we try to do with the European Media Freedom Act. Namely, we want to support free, independent and professional journalists. So for me, also in the case of my country, Slovakia, there is the professional media which should report the truth on Robert Fico or anybody else in the country.
We'll have to end it there. This time always goes by so quickly on this show, but thank you so much to both of you, Alexandra Geza and Vladimir Bilčík. That's all for this edition of Talking Europe. Do join us again soon.